Millionaire CEO races to rescue a woman in a crash, only to discover she's his ex, and the twins in the back seat are his. Welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your host, James, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into this unforgettable tale, let me know you're with me. Drop a present in the comments. Your presence means everything. May your heart be wrapped in peace, and each story you hear here warm your soul like sunrise after a storm. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We're a family here, bound by love and stories that heal. Hit that subscribe button and let's begin. The rain came down like fury from the heavens, thick, blinding sheets that turned the world into an oil painting of smudged shadows and ghostly light. Nana clutched the wheel, tension trembling through her arms, her cocoa brown skin tight over her knuckles. Her sleek black hair stuck to her face in damp streaks as the heater sputtered faint warmth. In the back, laughter bubbled, light, delicate giggles from her twin daughters, a melody of innocence in a world suddenly gone wild. "Mommy, pancakes when we get home?" one chirped, unaware of the slick doom slithering beneath the tires. "Of course, baby," Nana replied, her eyes loving but weary in the mirror. The double shift had drained her, but her spirit, still radiant, still fierce in its devotion. And then, chaos. A sudden flash of light, a deer frozen in fear. Her scream never reached her lips as she jerked the wheel. Screeching tires, the sickening spin of hydroplaning wheels. The car lurched, metal groaned. A thunderous collision against a thick tree sent the windshield exploding into shards. Silence fell, broken only by soft, stunned sobs. Nana's head rolled to the side, blood tracing a line down her temple. Her world faded to black. The girls, shaken but intact in their car seats, began to cry. One clung to a teddy bear like a lifeline. The other whimpered, reaching for their mother's unmoving form. Their haven had shattered, cracked open by a storm, and fate's cruel twist. Far from city lights, that lonely road was swallowed in storm, but destiny had not abandoned them. Headlights flared in the distance, a sleek black SUV skidding to a stop beside the wreck. The door burst open. A man stepped into the downpour, rain soaking through his coat as if it didn't matter. And to him, it didn't. Not now. Not as his eyes locked on the ruined car. Dread bloomed like poison in his chest. Xavier Knight, billionaire, CEO of Knight Enterprises, was no stranger to loss on the evening news. But now, this wasn't news. This was personal. He staggered forward. "Nana," he breathed, frozen by the sight behind cracked glass. In a flash, he was at her door, tearing it open, ignoring the gash the metal carved into his hand. The scent of blood, smoke, her stillness. 5 years. 5 long years since he had seen her. And now she was barely breathing. "Nana," he cried, voice hoarse and breaking. "Stay with me. Please, please." He pulled her into his arms as if by cradling her, he could undo the damage. Her head lolled gently against him, still so familiar, still soft. Memories stabbed him, the nights they shared, the promises that time had stolen. But this wasn't time for remembering. He needed help. Now he turned, but then froze. A sound from the back seat. Tiny voices. 2 little faces peeked over the seats. His heart slammed to a halt. Skin like hers. Eyes like his. One had her arched brows. The other, his mouth. Time cracked. He opened the door slowly. "You're safe now," he said gently, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring. Their wide eyes clung to his face. He unbuckled them with trembling hands and held them close, even as Nana lay limp in his arms. The driver had already called emergency services. Sirens wailed. The world spun. Paramedics came rushing, lifting Nana away as Xavier called out for caution, panic shredding his usual calm. "She's bleeding. Her head. Please, please be gentle." He who once brokered billion-dollar deals now stood trembling, soaked and bleeding himself, completely undone by the sight of the woman he once loved, and 2 children who looked like pieces of his soul. In the ambulance, he never let go. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. The girls clinging to his arms, never left him. At the hospital, nurses led them away for checkups, and he paced, desperate. Soaked through, hands still bleeding, but numb to everything but the door that separated him from her, from the past, from the truth. When the doctor finally appeared, Xavier rushed him. "She's stable," came the reply. "Mild concussion, bruises. She's lucky." Relief hit like floodwaters. Later, in the gentle hush of the recovery room, he sat at her bedside, his heart raw. She was still breathtaking. Even pale and bruised, her beauty sang. He brushed a strand of damp hair from her brow, his hands shaking. Why had she left? Why had she hidden this? Why did those girls look so much like him? The door creaked. The twins entered. They saw her and ran forward, hugging her gently. One turned, her small voice trembling. "Are you our daddy?" The world paused. Xavier's heart crashed beneath the weight of that question. He didn't know, not yet, but he would. And he wasn't walking away this time. Not again. The twins crept further into the room, their small fingers twined, eyes wide and shimmering with unspoken questions. They looked from their mother to the man who seemed both stranger and strangely familiar. The room glowed with soft light, and even the dull hospital walls couldn't steal the magic of that moment. Nana, even in stillness, remained ethereal. Her smooth skin, her high cheekbones, the full lips that had once whispered promises only he remembered. She hadn't changed. Not truly. "Is Mommy okay?" one twin asked, her voice barely more than breath. Xavier's chest ached. Her words rooted him, anchoring him from the torrent of memories threatening to pull him under. He looked at them again, and in their faces he saw pieces of himself staring back. A soft knock. A nurse stepped in, calm and kind. "They're 4," she said gently, her eyes warm. "They've been through so much, but they're strong." 4 years. His thoughts swirled. Nana had vanished 4 years ago. And now here were 2 little girls standing like a living echo of that missing time. Every piece suddenly fit, too perfectly. He dropped into the chair beside the bed, the leather sighing under his weight. He stared at her, pain and love carving lines into his face. He wanted to reach for her, to brush her hair back, to hold her and demand answers. But fear held him still. So much unsaid, so much lost. The girls reached for her gently, their love anchoring her to the now. Watching them, something in him cracked open. His voice broke the quiet. "Nana, can you hear me?" No reply, just the steady sound of her breath. He reached for her hand, closing his larger one around it. Warmth. It was still there. The past blurred into the present, and something solidified in him. He would not leave. Not until he knew the truth. Not until he knew them. This room, sterile and quiet, was now a battlefield between regret and possibility. His mind rewound to the last time he saw her. The way she kissed him that night. How he'd woken to an empty bed. No answers. No goodbyes. Now here she was, wounded, guarded by twin angels whose faces demanded the truth. One tugged at his sleeve, her voice small. "You're staying, right?" He met her eyes. "I'm here," he said. "We'll figure it out. Together." Time passed slowly, measured in heartbeats and whispered prayers. Xavier never left her side. Not once. The hospital faded. The world narrowed to this room, to the woman he still loved, and the daughters he might have always longed for without knowing. Every breath they took, Nana, the twins, was a vow in the silence. A vow that no distance, no secret, no pain would sever the bond they shared again. When at last Nana stirred, in a shared resolve, a promise not only to each other, but to the 2 little souls who had unknowingly carried their legacy of love through every silent year of separation. Theirs was a story broken by circumstance, but no longer by choice. Now, with hearts scarred but open, they faced a future that could finally be written together. Xavier remained by her side, their hands clasped like an anchor in storm-tossed waters. Every breath between them was a reckoning and a renewal, of trust, of belonging, of a love that had never truly died. For 5 long years, he had existed with a hollow in his soul, never knowing the shape of what he'd lost. But now, in the quiet glow of morning, that hollow was slowly being filled, not with perfection, but with possibility. Nina exhaled, the weight of her secrets finally spoken, loosening the knots in her chest. She had feared this moment for so long, the confrontation, the shame, the what-ifs. But now she found something else in Xavier's eyes. Not blame, but a fierce, aching love. She hadn't dared hope he would still want her, that he would still see her not as the woman who vanished, but as the woman who survived. "I was so scared," she admitted in a whisper, the words carrying more than fear. They carried isolation, strength, and a desperate kind of hope. "Every day I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how, or if it would only get us all killed." "I should have found you," he murmured. "I should have known something was wrong. You trusted what you saw, and I let you believe it." He shook his head, his thumb brushing gently across the back of her hand. "That ends now." Silence wrapped around them again, this time not heavy but sacred, pregnant with all that could be born from it. In the next room, Zariah stirred in her sleep, mumbling something sweet and innocent in the twilight between dreams. The sound drew a soft smile from Xavier, his daughters, his blood, his reason to fight harder than ever. He stood slowly and leaned over, his lips grazing Nina's forehead, with a reverence that undid her. "Rest now," he said, voice low and sure. "I'll be here when you wake up. We're not running anymore. We're facing this. Together." As he left the room to sit near the girls once more, Nina allowed her eyes to close, not in weariness this time, but in peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone, and outside the city breathed into dawn, rain-washed and reborn. Their interlaced fingers, Nana felt something stir inside her, something gentle, hesitant, yet undeniably alive. The armor she had so carefully forged over the years was no longer impenetrable. It had cracks now, and through those cracks, something tender and new was blooming. Forgiveness, perhaps, or hope, or maybe the kind of love that rises not from fairy tales or perfect circumstances, but from ashes, reborn, raw, and real. Xavier glanced at her as they reached the doorway to the room. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hand gave hers the slightest squeeze, and in that small gesture, she heard everything he couldn't say out loud. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I still love you." Inside, the girl stirred, Nyla letting out a soft whimper until Xavier bent to whisper something near her ear, and she sighed, settling again. Nana watched him tuck the blanket around her daughter's tiny frame, watched him kiss Zariah's forehead with a reverence that made her chest ache, and she wondered if maybe this man she had once pushed away out of fear, out of disappointment, was now the safest place her daughters had ever known, and maybe for her too. Later that night, after the room had gone quiet and the only sound was the slow rhythm of breathing and the distant hum of monitors, Nana stood at the window with her arms wrapped around herself. Xavier joined her, silent for a moment before speaking. "You were always the strongest person I knew," he said softly, "but you don't have to do this alone anymore." She turned to him, eyes shimmering. "I don't know how to let you back in." "Then let's figure it out," he whispered. "Not for what we were, for what we can still become." And just like that, with the moonlight catching the gold in his eyes and the warmth of his hand brushing hers again, Nana let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Maybe love wasn't a grand gesture or a perfect ending. Maybe it was a choice made in the quiet moments, the ones where pain met healing, where fear met presence, where hearts dared to believe in second chances. And as they stood together, side by side in that sacred hush between yesterday's scars and tomorrow's promises, a new story began to write itself. Not one of broken things, but of things breaking open. Love reborn, ready to face the future, as one. "Then stop hiding behind your fear, Xavier." Her voice was a breath, barely more than a prayer, but it landed in him like thunder. "Stop thinking love has to be earned through sacrifice or masked by grand gestures. I loved you when we had nothing but late-night ramen and dreams. I loved you when all we had was each other. Her thumb brushed a tear from his cheek. He hadn't realized it had fallen. And I still do. Not because of the villa, not because of the key, but because of you. The man who finally showed me his soul instead of his status. A long silence stretched between them, tender and weightless, until he leaned in just enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. Then let me start again, he whispered, his forehead still pressed to hers. Not as a man trying to fix the past, but as the one who wants to build every tomorrow with you. Nina smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with something fierce and gentle all at once, and she nodded. Not a grand, sweeping gesture, but a quiet, steady one. The kind that said, yes, I see you, and I choose you. The girls stirred on the couch just then, their sleepy giggles breaking the quiet magic with the innocence only children carry. And Nina and Xavier turned toward them, still kneeling, still holding on to each other, not just with hands but with hearts rejoined. The morning light touched everything now, his undone tie, her rumpled sweater, their daughter's sleepy faces, the cooled coffee, the key indeed forgotten on the counter. But none of it mattered, not anymore. Because this was their beginning, no longer built on regret or fear, but on the quiet, sacred vow of love, rediscovered and finally spoken. And as they rose to meet the day hand in hand, Nina knew with a certainty she hadn't felt in years, that sometimes the most powerful kind of home isn't one made of marble or steel. It's found in the arms of the man who once lost you and chose to fight like hell to find you again. Lay like soft feathers against skin that had come too close to never being warm again. Her thumb traced the lines of his knuckles, the same hands that once cradled their daughters to sleep, the same hands that had shielded her from the world's cruelty over and over again. The IVs, the beeping machines, the antiseptic cold of the hospital room, all of it blurred around the truth that pulsed like a drumbeat in her veins. He had lived. Her fortress hadn't fallen. Not yet. And when his eyes finally fluttered open, groggy and rimmed with pain, her breath hitched. He blinked slowly, his gaze swimming before it settled on her. A cracked, hoarse whisper escaped him. You stayed. Her lips quivered as she leaned closer, forehead to his once more, their breath mingling like before, but this time it was fragile. It was earned. Of course I stayed. I would have burned the sky if you hadn't come back to me. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips despite the pain, and with the last strength he could muster, he squeezed her fingers. I'm not done protecting you. I'll never be. She shook her head, tears falling freely now as she pressed a trembling kiss to the back of his hand. You don't have to protect me from everything, Xavier. Just stay. That's all I'll ever need. And in that quiet room, as dawn broke across the city beyond those high-glass windows, a new kind of vow settled between them. One not born of desperation or fear, but of resilience, of a love forged through fire and shaped in silence. Outside, the city stirred. But inside, a man who had almost lost everything clung to the woman who had brought him back from the edge. And she, once hidden, once hunted, held the only truth that mattered now. That love, real love, doesn't just survive the storm. It becomes the shelter. Her hand rested gently against his cheek, her fingers trembling as though afraid he might vanish again. And when he finally stirred, eyelids fluttering open like a man waking from a distant dream, she leaned down, tears spilling freely, and kissed him through the ache in her chest. Her voice broke against his lips, a whisper carried on a prayer. You're not allowed to die, Knight. Not when I just found you again. His fingers tightened weakly around hers, his gaze still dazed but locked on hers with a devotion so fierce, so soul-deep, it rendered words unnecessary. He couldn't speak, not yet, but the way he looked at her, like she was the very reason he fought to breathe, silenced the storm in her heart. No enemy, no fate could rival a love like this, and this time she would be the one to fight for him. Morning light spilled through the hospital windows, painting golden trails across the crisp white sheets. Nina sat beside him, her hands wrapped firmly around his, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The beeping machines no longer terrified her. They faded into the background, replaced by something gentle and quietly defiant. Hope. the kind that blooms slowly, like a wildflower pressing through cracks in concrete. When Xavier opened his eyes again, clearer this time, the corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest smile. He took in her face, bare, tear-stained, exhausted, but achingly beautiful in its honesty. And then, just above a breath, he whispered her name like it was a lifeline, like it was sacred. Over the next days, as strength returned to his limbs, so too did something soft and familiar between them. The lingering glances, the warmth of her fingers, combing through his hair as she helped him sit up. The sound of her laughter echoing through sterile walls as he complained about bland hospital food and charmed the nurses with false bravado. And when the discharge papers were signed, he didn't return to the penthouse, the cold tower of steel and solitude. He went home, to the modest, love-worn apartment where Nina lived with their daughters. Not because it was safer, because it was home in a way his billions never could be. The first morning he woke there, wrapped in tangled blankets, tiny feet wedged between his ribs, and Nina's warm form curled against him, he didn't reach for his phone, didn't think about numbers or news. He reached for her hand instead, kissed her knuckles while their daughters bounced on the bed, curls wild, eyes glittering with mischief. That day, Xavier wore cotton pajamas and burnt pancakes while trying to impress them in the kitchen. Laughter rang out as flour coated the counter and syrup found its way across his cheek, courtesy of Maher, the mischievous twin who declared him their sticky daddy. He'd once ruled an empire, but here was his kingdom. Laughter, small arms clinging to his neck, wide eyes full of wonder. And later, when they curled up on the couch to watch cartoons about dragons and princesses, he didn't answer calls or respond to emails. He held Nina close, her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "I miss so much, but I'll never miss another second again." And the promise wasn't just for her, it was for him too, because something inside had shifted, not violently, but quietly, like rivers reshaping stone. Each evening became a ceremony of healing, of togetherness, of reclaiming the life they were meant to live. Sometimes he cooked dinner with Nina, badly, other times surprisingly well. And when the twins were asleep, tiny breaths humming through the walls, he'd pull her into the kitchen, the dim lights casting a moonglow across the tile as they swayed to no music at all, her head against his chest, his arms tight around her waist. In those quiet dances, everything unspoken was forgiven. Not because words weren't needed, but because love had replaced them. He looked at her now, not just as the mother of his children or the girl he once let down, but as the soul that called his own home, the lighthouse he had drifted back to. And Nina, who had spent years holding it all together, finally let herself be held. No resistance, no armor, just trust. And Xavier showed her every day that he was still choosing her. In every kiss to her forehead, in every bedtime story told in silly voices, in every terrible attempt at braiding curls or twirling little feet across his shoes to music only they could hear. Each night, as they curled together in bed, he'd trace soft circles on her back and whisper apologies, not to earn forgiveness, but to shed old guilt. And she answered not with words, but with touch, her lips against his, her body pressing close in quiet reply. "I've always belonged here." And he held her like she was the only truth in the world. In the mornings, as sunlight painted soft shadows across the walls and the world rushed to demand things from them, Xavier didn't rise to chase power. He stayed, anchored in these sacred, ordinary moments. One quiet Sunday, while painting with their fingers and ruining the carpet, little Mir looked up and asked, "Daddy, are you going to work today?" And without hesitation, he smiled and replied, "No, sweetheart. Today, I'm just yours." And Nina's eyes brimmed, not with sorrow, but with something purer, the joy of finally having the life she once only dreamed about. That night, beneath a sky scattered with stars, he kissed her with hands in her hair, breath catching between them. And he didn't say, "I love you." He didn't have to. The way his soul clung to hers made it obvious. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a man transformed, not diminished, but deepened by love. A father, a partner, a man made whole. As the sun began to set over the city skyline, gold and amber spilling across a rooftop garden strung with fairy lights, a hush fell over the intimate crowd. White chairs lined with roses, fragrant jasmine mingling with the scent of fresh-cut grass. Nina stepped forward, her gown whispering around her, ivory silk and lace catching the light like a second skin. She held Zariah's steady hand, while Nyla scattered petals with wild joy, painting the path ahead with color. Every step was a heartbeat, a promise. Her eyes locked with Xavier's, no longer the cold, unreadable man from years past. His gaze shimmered with unshed tears, holding the weight of every battle they'd survived. He held a velvet box, inside a simple ring, not a symbol of wealth, but of a vow to be present, to never let the past steal another moment. The violins swelled softly, carrying them into a space where time bent around them. Their vows were not just promises, they were lifelines, stories of healing, testaments to love found and fiercely protected. Nina spoke of lost years reclaimed. Xavier spoke of courage, not in business, but in learning to love and be loved. When he slid the ring onto her finger, it felt like fate's quiet seal. Their kiss was soft, but vast. And behind them, the twins giggled and cheered, their joy ringing like bells. That night, wrapped in one another beneath a sky of endless stars, Xavier lifted Nina in his arms and carried her across the threshold of a home not defined by walls, but by love. The twins' laughter echoed softly, a lullaby. The city hummed below, but inside their sanctuary, time moved differently. In every touch, every glance, there was memory, loss, and renewal. They had survived storms, and now they thrived. As Nina rested her head over Savian's heart, its rhythm steady beneath her palm, she knew they hadn't just found their way back. They had rewritten their story, together, forever.